Have you ever stopped to wonder whether what people call love is actually just a disguise for the terror of sitting alone with themselves? What if the majority of relationships in this world are not really about genuine human connection at all, but rather about escaping the silence that lives deep inside every one of us? Ancient Stoic thinkers cautioned humanity about this long ago. The restraints we willingly wrap around ourselves are the most difficult ones to ever break free from. And the cruel irony is that those restraints rarely look like chains. They arrive dressed as affection, warmth, and security. But somewhere underneath all of it, something in you knows the truth. Something feels wrong. The reality is that most human beings do not pursue relationships from a place of completeness and inner strength. They pursue them because they are frightened of confronting who they truly are when the world goes quiet around them. They would rather pour their attention into managing another person's burdens than sit still with the weight of their own unexamined thoughts. This is precisely why so many people slowly lose every recognizable piece of themselves, surrendering bit by bit just to hold on to someone who was never truly right for them. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's great minds, once reflected that the real thing worth fearing is not death itself, but rather the tragedy of never having genuinely lived. And that is exactly the fate awaiting anyone who cannot tolerate the experience of being unattached. You stop truly inhabiting your own life. What follows here is not a rejection of love, nor a call for permanent isolation. It is an invitation to reclaim your personal authority. It is a path toward becoming someone who stands on solid ground independently, so that whenever love does come, it arrives as a conscious decision made from wholeness, not as a desperate response to inner emptiness. Because genuine love only exists when it is born from freedom rather than fear. Before we walk through 10 reasons why staying single may be the wisest investment you ever make in yourself, consider this your reminder that what is being built through these ideas is not mere conversation. It is a framework for the kind of clarity and inner strength that allows you to move through this world entirely on your own terms. The first reason is that you shield yourself from the wrong connections. Choosing to remain single hands you one of the most underappreciated forms of protection available to any human being. You keep the wrong people out of your life before they can do their damage. Consider for a moment how many individual lives have been fundamentally altered, even completely derailed, simply because someone became entangled with a partner who was wrong for them. It does not require a genuinely terrible person to cause destruction. All it requires is the wrong person meeting you at the wrong stage of your journey. A relationship built on desperation rather than discernment does not merely consume your hours. It can consume entire years of your potential, your vitality, and your sense of self. When someone is starving for love, they become reckless. They stop asking the important questions. Is this person truly compatible with who I am and where I am going? Do they honor the limits I have set for myself? Does their presence add calm to my existence, or does it bring only turbulence? Instead of pausing to evaluate, a desperate person leaps forward, hoping that another human being will dissolve the loneliness they are afraid to face directly. That is the moment things begin to unravel. You begin overlooking the warning signs that were there all along. You construct elaborate justifications for behavior that deserves no justification, and piece by piece, you dissolve into someone you no longer recognize. Staying single functions as armor against that entire cycle. Stoic philosophy held that freedom is among the highest goods a person can possess. Freedom from being enslaved to your own cravings. Freedom from the invisible tyranny of other people's opinions and moods. When you are single, you hold that freedom in your hands. You are not tethered to another person's emotional weather. their hunger for control, or their self-destructive patterns. You move through your days without being obligated to clean up messes that are not yours to clean. And if we are being completely honest with ourselves, how many people around us are currently trapped in relationships with partners who drain the life from them, pile stress upon them, and prevent them from becoming who they are meant to be, simply because they would rather endure that suffering than face an empty apartment? Staying single grants you the ability to say no with authority. No to manipulation dressed as love. No to someone who cannot see your value. No to someone who wishes to reshape your identity according to their preferences. You owe no explanation for why you are unavailable, why you are protecting your time, or why your personal development comes before companionship. You belong to yourself entirely, and that is a power that far too many people discard the moment loneliness begins to whisper. Here is the deeper truth. When you are not operating from a place of need, you become far more perceptive. You can read people with greater accuracy because your vision is no longer distorted by desperation. You notice who is genuine and who is performing. You see who honors you and who is simply using your availability to serve themselves. Solitude, in this way, sharpens your judgment. It functions as a filter, keeping the wrong attachments from ever getting close enough to leave a mark. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of your inner life determines the quality of everything you experience outwardly, and one could reasonably extend that insight to say that the quality of the people you allow into your life shapes your existence just as profoundly as your own thoughts do. When you wait until you are grounded enough, clear-minded enough, and patient enough to choose with wisdom, you spare yourself an enormous portion of the suffering that most people accept as an unavoidable feature of adult life. Being single is not deprivation. It is discernment in action. It is a form of self-respect so deep that it protects your time, your energy, and the very essence of who you are from those who have not earned access to any of it. Each day you spend in that protective solitude is not a day lost. It is a day saved from potential damage that might have taken a decade to undo. The second reason is that you reclaim total ownership of your time. Among the most extraordinary gifts available to someone who is single, perhaps none is more tangible than this one. Every single hour of every single day belongs completely and unconditionally to you. Think carefully about what happens to your time inside the wrong relationship. Your hours, your evenings, your weekends, even your spontaneous moments all become subject to constant negotiation. Suddenly, you are not the author of your own schedule. Every plan, every choice, every destination must pass through the filter of another person's needs, preferences, and moods. And if that other person has a fundamentally different relationship with time than you do, if they do not guard it the way you know it deserves to be guarded, you will find yourself perpetually behind, perpetually frustrated, and perpetually robbed of the hours that should have gone toward the things that genuinely matter to you. Singlehood changes all of that. Your mornings are yours to design as you see fit. Your late nights belong to whatever ambitious idea is consuming your imagination, without anyone lying awake resenting the light still on. You can book a flight impulsively, disappear into a skill you are trying to build, or simply exist in silence without generating guilt in someone else. That is not a small thing. That is life as it was meant to be lived. Seneca, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, offered a reflection that feels as urgent now as it ever has. The problem is not that human lives are short, he observed. The problem is that we squander enormous portions of them. And one of the most unconscious ways people throw away irreplaceable time is by surrendering it to relationships that extract from them more than they ever deposit. hours spent locked in circular arguments, hours spent manufacturing artificial peace, hours spent mopping up the chaos created by someone else's unresolved wounds. Those hours are gone permanently. No apology, no future success, and no beautiful memory can restore them. When you are single, you develop a relationship with time that most people never access. You begin to understand, at a visceral level, how much you can accomplish when you are not perpetually explaining yourself, compromising your instincts, or walking through your days in a state of low-level emotional depletion. You redirect that energy toward the architecture of your own life, your health, your intellectual growth, your craft, your ambitions, and the mathematics of that redirection are staggering. A single year of focused self-investment during a period of intentional solitude can accelerate your trajectory in ways that would otherwise require a decade to achieve. Beyond productivity, freedom over your time means freedom from someone else's emotional climate. Your plans no longer collapse under the weight of another person's bad day. Your weekends are not swallowed by the aftermath of preventable arguments. Your energy arrives at your ambitions clean and intact, rather than worn and apologetic. You begin to feel how much of life becomes available when you stop negotiating away your minutes. And time, it must be said, is the only resource in human existence that operates on a one-way street. Money can be rebuilt. Opportunities can be found again in new forms, but a day that has passed is permanently behind you. So ask yourself with full seriousness, how many of your hours have already been handed to people who responded to that gift with carelessness or contempt? How many mornings have begun in apology for things you should never have been asked to apologize for? How many evenings have dissolved into arguments that served no one and built nothing? Being single gives you the chance to take all of those hours back and pour them into the construction of something extraordinary. And here is the twist that most people never anticipate. The discipline you build around protecting your time during a period of intentional singlehood makes you infinitely more discerning when a worthy person eventually appears. You will not be easily impressed by presence alone. You will quickly identify whether someone values your time the way it deserves to be valued, or whether they see it as a resource available for their casual consumption. And the moment you sense the latter, you will not hesitate. The third reason is that you build the kind of self-discipline that distraction makes impossible. There is something rare and transformative that becomes accessible when you choose to remain single. You gain the conditions necessary for genuine self-mastery. No manufactured drama pulling your focus sideways. No emotional turbulence not of your own making cycling through your days. No invisible obligations eating away at the edges of your concentration. Just the unobstructed encounter between you and the kind of person you are choosing to become. The honest truth is that relationships, even good ones, carry noise. They populate your mental bandwidth with countless invisible tasks. The constant awareness of another person's internal state. The energy required to navigate what they think of your choices, the slow, barely perceptible erosion of your own priorities as you redirect more and more of yourself toward managing the emotional ecosystem of a partnership. What often gets described as love can sometimes be a practice in progressive self-erasure. When you remain single, you eliminate that noise at the source. There are no mornings poisoned by unresolved tension from the night before. There are no evenings when you arrive at your pillow carrying anxiety that originated in someone else's insecurities. In that cleared space, the only question that matters finally becomes audible. Who exactly do you intend to become, and what are you willing to do every day to get there? Epictetus, one of the most uncompromising voices in Stoic tradition, declared that no person is genuinely free who has not first mastered themselves, and that mastery is simply not available to someone whose attention is perpetually divided between their own development and the maintenance of someone else's emotional world. Self-mastery means constructing habits so consistent and so aligned with your values that they become the architecture of your identity. Rising before the day demands anything of you. Training your body until its strength becomes a foundation your mind can rely on. Pursuing knowledge aggressively and without apology. Designing routines that serve your long-term vision rather than your short-term comfort. When you are single, none of those commitments require anyone else's cooperation or approval. No one is lobbying against your 5 a.m. alarm. No one is treating your ambition as a threat to their security. You are free to pursue excellence on your own terms, at your own tempo, without softening your edges to protect someone else's feelings. Reflect for a moment on how many people you know who have spent multiple years of their lives pouring the majority of their best energy into salvaging relationships that were fundamentally unsalvageable. They were not building anything during those years. They were maintaining something that was slowly falling apart. Their best hours went to managing fights. Their clearest thinking went to decoding behavior that should never have required decoding. Their highest energy went to keeping another person comfortable rather than to building a version of themselves worth inhabiting. That is not love. That is the slow forfeiture of your potential to something that is not capable of honoring it. Being single redirects every unit of that energy back to its rightful owner. You can commit to the gym, to your manuscripts, to your studies, to your projects, to your meditations, to your growth, without asking anyone's permission. And the results of that commitment do not appear gradually, they compound rapidly. Each small victory over inertia builds a layer of confidence that makes the next victory easier. That momentum, sustained over months without interruption, creates a version of you that is almost unrecognizable compared to the person who started. Self-mastery is also fundamentally an emotional undertaking. In solitude, you are left with no one to absorb blame and no one to provide distraction when you would rather not look honestly at yourself. You sit with your fears and your doubts, without the option of offloading them onto someone else. That confrontation, uncomfortable as it invariably is precisely the process through which genuine resilience develops. You learn to soothe your own mind when it spirals. You learn to reignite your own motivation when it dims. You learn to stand back up from the floor, using only what you already carry inside you. That is a skill no relationship can teach you, because relationships, by their very nature, always offer an alternative. The fourth reason is that you keep your inner world protected from people who poison it. One of the most underappreciated advantages of choosing to remain single is the straightforward fact that your energy stays yours. Let us be completely clear about something. Nothing depletes a human being more efficiently than being permanently attached to a person who is toxic. Toxic individuals do not merely consume your hours. They contaminate your mental environment. They introduce a slow, persistent doubt into your perception of yourself. They engineer arguments from nothing and sustain them far longer than any rational exchange could justify. They have a gift for making you feel that no matter how much you give, you have somehow always given the wrong thing or not quite enough. That is not love by any reasonable definition. It is the systematic dismantling of someone's spirit, executed so gradually that the person being dismantled rarely identifies what is happening until years have already disappeared. When you are single, you do not participate in that dynamic. You are not tiptoeing through your own mornings in fear of triggering someone else's unpredictable moods. You are not checking your phone with a low-grade dread that you may have somehow caused offense. You are not carrying the accumulated weight of another person's unresolved trauma across your shoulders as though it were your responsibility to resolve what you did not create. Your energy, the fuel that powers every meaningful thing you do in this life, stays clean, coherent, and available for its actual purpose. Marcus Aurelius observed that the conditions of your mind are shaped profoundly by the conditions of your environment. And nothing shapes your environment more immediately and more completely than the people you allow to occupy it. A toxic person does not need to raise their voice or show obvious cruelty to do damage. They can corrupt your inner atmosphere through constant subtle criticism, through emotional unavailability deployed strategically, through manufactured insecurity that keeps you working to earn a sense of safety you should never have had to earn in the first place. Toxic people rarely introduce themselves as such. They often arrive wearing the costume of love, offering warmth, familiarity, and the relief of not being alone. But you can feel the truth beneath the surface if you stay quiet enough to listen. They take more than they contribute. They require your continuous attention while remaining largely indifferent to your development. They prefer managing you over genuinely knowing you, and the longer you allow their presence in your orbit, the more of your energy disappears into a void that cannot be filled, because they have no real intention of filling it. Staying single removes that drain from your life entirely. It puts you in a position to choose peace over stimulation, genuine growth over dramatic intensity, and the clarity of an uncontaminated inner world over the constant low-level static of managed chaos. Think about what a morning looks like when it belongs entirely to you. No dread waiting for you before your eyes are fully open, no passive hostility embedded in a text message before your coffee has cooled. Just space, just silence, just the rare freedom of deciding for yourself what this particular day will mean. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of everything worth building. And here is the discipline that singlehood teaches you most reliably. It trains you to say no, to recognize without requiring convincing when someone's behavior is telling you something important about who they are. To walk away from situations that your nervous system identified as problematic long before your reasoning mind was willing to admit it. Once you have lived inside the quietness of a life free from toxic influence, your tolerance for that kind of pollution drops to nearly nothing. You have tasted what clarity feels like, and you are no longer willing to trade it for company. The fifth reason is that you learn to genuinely enjoy being in your own presence. In the beginning, solitude tends to feel like something is missing. The silence has a weight to it. You sit in a room that contains only you and your thoughts, and suddenly those thoughts are louder and more insistent than you remember them being. The instinct for most people in that moment is to escape, reach for the phone, create noise, find a body to fill the space. Accept whatever companionship is available just to interrupt the discomfort. But the discomfort itself is the door. Because if you cannot genuinely enjoy your own company, then nothing and no one you ever bring into your life will permanently resolve the emptiness you feel when they are absent. The skill of being at peace with yourself is the only foundation on which any lasting contentment can be constructed. When you remain single, that skill is not optional. You are required to develop it whether you feel ready or not. You are asked to face yourself completely. The parts you have been proud of and the parts you have been hoping no one, including yourself, would look at too closely. And as you spend more time in that honest encounter with who you are, something begins to shift. You begin to notice that the person you are spending time with is not as frightening as you anticipated. You begin to see strength where you expected only weakness. You begin to find that you actually enjoy your own perspective, your own humor, your own particular way of moving through the world. That is the beginning of the confidence that nothing external can replicate. Carl Jung, one of the most penetrating psychological minds of the modern era, wrote that loneliness does not arise from the absence of other people. It arises from the inability to share with others the things that feel most essential and true. Which is to say that being surrounded by people provides no protection against the experience of being profoundly alone if you do not first understand yourself. But when you have done the work of learning your own interior landscape, when you have spent time with your own depths and made a kind of peace with them, you are never truly alone in the way that terrifies most people. You carry your own presence as a source of genuine comfort. Imagine the quality of life that becomes available when your own presence is sufficient. A solitary walk becomes an experience of actual freedom rather than a reminder of what you lack. A meal eaten alone becomes a small pleasure rather than a public confirmation of your isolation. Quiet evenings become opportunities for creativity, reflection, and restoration rather than hours to be endured until morning. Your internal life becomes rich enough that you stop spending your energy wishing for something external to arrive and complete what is already, if you look carefully, already whole. And here is the consequence that transforms everything. Once you have arrived at a genuine enjoyment of your own company, you stop pursuing people out of desperation. You stop contorting yourself into configurations that do not fit you in order to make someone else comfortable enough to stay. You stop mistaking a tolerance for your presence with a recognition of your worth, because you already recognize it. Any connection that comes after that realization arrives on entirely different terms. It is a choice made from abundance, an addition to a life that already works, not a rescue operation launched from a place of quiet panic. The sixth reason is that you stop feeding the hunger for external validation. One of the most insidious patterns that develops inside unhealthy relationships is the slow, barely visible transformation of a person's inner compass. You begin making decisions not based on what feels true and right to you, but based on what will generate approval from the person whose opinion you have made central to your self-image. It happens in increments so small that most people do not notice the drift until they look back and realize they have been performing rather than living for longer than they can clearly remember. What do they think of this? Will they still want me if I pursue that? Can I hold this opinion without risking their comfort? Before long, your actual self has been replaced by a carefully managed presentation designed to maintain access to someone else's approval. When you are single, that performance has no audience, which means it has no purpose, which means you are eventually liberated from it. You are not waking up to assess whether today's version of yourself will meet someone else's requirements. You are not editing your ambitions downward to fit inside someone else's sense of what is appropriate for you. You are not suppressing opinions, rerouting your personality, or shrinking the most vivid parts of yourself to make someone else feel unthreatened. You are simply you, fully expressed, without negotiation. What most people do not realize about validation is that it operates like a substance that must be consumed in ever-increasing quantities. One expression of approval feels extraordinary for a brief window, and then the baseline shifts and the hunger returns, and you need another one. The more you build your sense of worth on someone else's consistent reassurance, the less capacity you have for generating that sense of worth independently. You become structurally dependent on something that cannot be reliably supplied, and that dependency is precisely why so many people endure relationships that are objectively bad for them. They have outsourced the responsibility for their own self-worth, and they are terrified of what happens if they take it back. Epictetus offered something that cuts through all of that. He wrote that a person who wishes to develop must be willing to appear unimpressive, even ridiculous, to others, which is to say that genuine growth requires prioritizing your own honest assessment of yourself over the opinions of those around you. If your inner peace is contingent on their evaluation of you, you will never fully inhabit your own life. Singlehood is the training ground for that discipline. It is the practice of validating yourself, of standing in your own kitchen at the end of an ordinary day and knowing, without needing anyone to confirm it, that you have worth, of making a decision based purely on your own values and trusting that decision even when no one is there to applaud it, of speaking the truth in contexts where a softer, more popular version of the truth would be more convenient, of wearing who you are without apology and discovering that the sky does not fall when you stop performing. The paradox, and it is one of the most reliable paradoxes in human experience, is that the moment you stop chasing validation, you become genuinely magnetic. People are drawn to those who do not appear to need their approval. Confidence is attractive, not because it signals superiority, but because it signals safety. When you carry yourself as someone whose self-worth does not fluctuate with other people's moods, you create a quality of presence that most people spend their entire lives trying to manufacture through external means. But you cannot manufacture it. You can only build it, slowly and unglamorously, in the privacy of your own single life. The seventh reason is that solitude forges a quality of strength that cannot be built any other way. Most people hear the word solitude and immediately load it with negative associations: isolation, failure, the absence of something essential. But this reading is precisely backward. Solitude is not what happens when strength is absent. Solitude is where strength is created. It is the condition that forces growth the way deep water forces a swimmer to either develop technique or go under. When you are single, solitude is not a temporary state you are passing through on the way to something better. It is the environment itself. And at first, that environment is genuinely uncomfortable. The silence reveals things about you that constant companionship had been conveniently obscuring. Your unresolved anxieties surface without anyone to distract you from them. Your most persistent insecurities stop being background noise and become the foreground. And this is exactly the moment when most people flee back into the arms of whatever company is available, because facing themselves feels more threatening than facing almost anything else. But those who stay in that discomfort, who choose to sit with it rather than escape from it, discover something on the other side that changes everything. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in private notes never intended for an audience, described his own mind as the most peaceful and unconstrained place available to him. Nowhere external, he observed, can offer the stillness that exists within a person who has learned to govern their own inner world. Solitude is where you learn that governance. There is no one to deflect to, no one to absorb your frustration, no one to step in and carry you through a bad night. There is only you, and the question of whether you are capable of being enough. The answer, discovered through the repeated experience of surviving difficult moments alone, is always yes. You are enough. You are more capable than your fearful self estimated, and each time you prove that to yourself, the proof accumulates into a kind of internal architecture that is nearly impossible to destroy from the outside. The relationship you have with loss transforms entirely once you have spent significant time in solitude. You realize that you have endured entire evenings without the text message you were hoping for, entire mornings without the warmth you were used to, entire seasons without the particular comfort that another person's presence provides, and that you are still here, still functional, still growing, still yourself. Once you carry the lived knowledge that you can survive absence, rejection, and quiet without collapsing, the fear of those experiences loses most of its grip on your decision-making. You are no longer willing to compromise your values or diminish your standards simply to avoid the discomfort of being without. Because you know from direct experience that the discomfort has a bottom and that the bottom is livable. There is also a quality of mental clarity that emerges from sustained solitude that simply cannot be accessed in any other way. When the constant noise of managing a relationship is absent, your own thoughts become audible again in a new and more useful way. You begin to distinguish between the dreams that are authentically yours and the ones that arrive through the quiet influence of someone else's expectations. You identify the ambitions you have been carrying by default and replace them with ones you have actually chosen. Your sense of direction becomes more honest and therefore more powerful. Solitude does not make you cold or disconnected from the human experience. It makes you stable. It makes you the kind of person who can walk into difficult situations without being swept away by them, who can disagree without erupting, who can absorb disappointment without it redefining their sense of self. That steadiness, forged in the particular fire of time spent alone, is worth more than almost any comfort that company can provide. The eighth reason is that you are free to dedicate yourself entirely to your purpose without apology. One of the most reliable ways that people in mismatched relationships gradually lose their sense of direction is through the incremental subordination of their own goals to the comfort and security of their partner. It starts in small ways. You soften your schedule slightly to accommodate theirs. You scale back a professional ambition that was making them feel insecure. You redirect an evening that could have advanced your vision toward the management of their emotional needs. Each individual compromise seems reasonable in isolation, but the accumulation of those compromises over months and years produces a person who has been slowly redirected away from the life they actually wanted to build, and who rarely remembers exactly when the redirecting began. When you are single, none of that redirection is possible because there is no one positioned to initiate it. You do not owe anyone an explanation for why you are still working at midnight. You do not need to manage anyone's insecurity about the size of your ambition. You do not have to make yourself smaller or more manageable or less inconveniently passionate in order to make someone else feel comfortable in your proximity. You are free to be as relentlessly focused on your purpose as your purpose demands. Marcus Aurelius wrote that genuine joy, the deep and lasting variety, rather than the shallow and temporary kind, comes from devoting yourself to the specific things you were made to do, not from performing busyness, not from accumulating approval, but from being genuinely and completely engaged with the work that is authentically yours. Most people never arrive at that joy because they give their best hours to something other than their actual purpose. They spend their peak energy maintaining peace rather than creating meaning, and they arrive at the end of their days with a quiet, persistent sense that something essential was left undone. Staying single removes that obstacle. It gives you the unusual and underappreciated privilege of throwing yourself at the thing that matters most to you without requiring permission from anyone and without managing anyone's reaction to the intensity of your commitment. If your purpose requires early mornings, you can have them without negotiation. If it requires solitary stretches of deep work that make you temporarily unavailable to the social world, you can protect those stretches without guilt. If it requires a kind of obsessive focus that most people around you do not understand and would not choose for themselves, you can sustain that focus without apology. The most accomplished people in any field tend to share a specific characteristic during the periods when they produced their most significant work. They were doing it during seasons of life when they had either not yet found the right partner or had made a deliberate choice to prioritize the work above the comfort of companionship. This is not coincidence. Purpose-driven work requires a quality of presence that cannot be fully divided. It demands that you show up for it with most of what you have, most of the time, and that is simply not compatible with the kind of energy expenditure that managing the wrong relationship reliably demands. Using your single season to pursue your purpose is not selfishness. It is the responsible stewardship of the one life you have been given. And the beautiful paradox is that a person who is genuinely consumed by meaningful work becomes profoundly more interesting and more magnetic than someone who has nothing in particular they are trying to build. Purpose is attractive in a way that availability alone can never be. The ninth reason is that you develop the capacity to be your own emotional anchor. Among all the gifts that intentional singlehood offers, perhaps the most consequential and the most rare is this one. You learn how to sustain yourself emotionally without requiring anyone else to do it for you. The majority of people do not grasp how completely they have outsourced their emotional regulation until they are suddenly without the person who had been performing that function on their behalf. They relied on that person to generate their sense of being loved, to de-escalate their anxiety, to remind them of their value on days when they had lost track of it. And when that source disappears, through a breakup, through distance, through the ordinary deterioration of connection over time, they discover that they have no internal infrastructure for doing any of those things themselves. When you are single, you are required to build that infrastructure. The quiet evenings hit you harder than you expected. The difficult days carry more weight because there is no one absorbing part of that weight on your behalf. You feel the pull toward something, toward anyone, that could interrupt the discomfort. But if you resist that pull and instead stay with the experience of carrying yourself through the hard moment, something begins to solidify inside you. A muscle you had never been required to develop starts to build. You discover your own capacity for self-soothing, for self-encouragement, for picking yourself up from states of genuine despair, using only the internal resources you have been cultivating. That is not a minor accomplishment. Epictetus described the mastery of oneself as the prerequisite for any genuine form of freedom. Emotional independence is precisely that mastery in its most personal form. It means that your peace does not fluctuate according to someone else's mood. It means that your self-worth does not evaporate when someone fails to confirm it. It means that your capacity for happiness does not require a specific person to cooperate with your preferences in order to function. Observe how most people actually live. One disagreement in a relationship contaminates an entire week with a grey residue of unresolved tension. One breakup dismantles a person's fundamental belief in their own worth. One delayed or unsatisfying reply to a message generates hours of low-grade anxiety that undermines focus and depletes energy. That is not freedom. It is a dependency as profound and as limiting as any other form of dependency, with the additional complexity that it is dressed in the language of love and therefore rarely identified as the problem it actually is. Staying single gives you the conditions to break that pattern. You practice confirming your own value without waiting for someone else to do it for you. You learn to generate genuine moments of joy from simple and self-directed sources. Music that moves you, physical exertion that clears your head, literature that expands your understanding, silence that restores rather than frightens. Gradually, the center of gravity for your emotional life shifts from external to internal. Your contentment stops depending on what is happening around you and begins depending on what you have chosen to cultivate within yourself. And here is the counterintuitive truth that most people never discover because they never give themselves the chance. Emotional independence does not diminish your capacity for deep connection. It enhances it. Because when you arrive in a relationship already whole, you are not asking the other person to bear the weight of your unresolved need for completion. You are showing up with something genuine to offer, rather than an invisible invoice for what you require in return. That is what real love looks like, not two incomplete people filling each other's gaps, but two complete people choosing, freely and without desperation, to walk alongside each other. The 10th and final reason is that you arrive at a sense of wholeness before you share yourself with anyone else. The most corrosive myth that most of us absorb during childhood is the one that frames human beings as inherently incomplete. The fairy tales, the love songs, the casual comments made by well-meaning relatives at family gatherings, all of them point toward the same implicit conclusion. You are a half that needs a corresponding half. You are a fragment in search of the piece that will finally make you whole. It sounds like poetry, but it functions as a sentence. Because the moment you internalize the belief that you are incomplete as you are, you begin approaching every relationship not as an enrichment of a life that is already working, but as a desperate search for the external element that will resolve an internal deficiency. And from that starting position, you will always be vulnerable to accepting less than you deserve, contorting yourself to hold on to what you have found, and losing yourself steadily in the process of trying to keep someone who was never quite right from leaving. When you are single, you have the time and the space and the enforced honesty to dismantle that myth at the root. You begin to live, incrementally and then entirely, inside the reality that you are sufficient, not perfect, not finished growing, but sufficient. You do not require someone else's presence in your life to make your existence meaningful. You do not need another person's love as evidence that you deserve to take up space in the world. You are whole already as you stand, with everything that implies, including the parts of you that still have significant work to do. And when that recognition becomes not just an idea you find intellectually appealing, but an embodied truth you live from, everything changes. You stop entering relationships from the posture of someone who needs to be completed. You enter them, when you enter them, from the posture of someone who has something extraordinary to offer and who will only accept something extraordinary in return. You stop clinging. You stop performing. You stop bending yourself into configurations that betray your own values in order to prevent someone from walking away. Because you already know, at a level deeper than thought, that their departure cannot take anything essential from you. Marcus Aurelius wrote that almost nothing is necessary for a genuinely good life. Everything required is already present within a person who has learned to look in the right direction. That is the truth that your single season, used with intention and honesty, can make real for you. Not as a philosophical idea to admire from a distance, but as a lived reality you inhabit every day. Of course, this work is not comfortable. You will face the parts of yourself you have been strategically avoiding. You will sit with insecurities that other people or constant stimulation had been covering. You will have nights where the absence of company feels less like freedom and more like punishment. But if you stay in it, if you do the actual work of becoming someone you respect when no one else is watching, you will reach something that no relationship has ever been able to provide from the outside. A fundamental steadiness, a sense of completeness that breakups cannot shatter, rejection cannot undermine, and absence cannot dissolve. And then, from that place, you become capable of something most people never access. You become capable of loving without fear, of letting people genuinely in without losing your grip on yourself in the process, of giving freely because what you are giving comes from overflow rather than scarcity. Bringing it all together, staying single is not a condition to be endured or a failure to be explained away or a source of quiet shame to be managed in social settings. It is a season of extraordinary opportunity, a season where you take back the authority over your own life and use it to build something that no one can take from you. You protect yourself from connections that would have diminished rather than expanded you. You recover full ownership of your time and use it as the weapon it actually is. You build discipline and self-mastery in the absence of the distractions that would otherwise prevent them from developing. You protect the energy that everything good in your life depends on. You learn to inhabit your own presence without apology or discomfort. You stop measuring your worth by other people's willingness to confirm it. You grow a quality of inner strength that only sustained solitude can produce. You dedicate yourself to the purpose that is authentically and irreplaceably yours. You build the emotional independence that makes you the kind of person others can actually rely on, rather than the kind who secretly requires constant emotional maintenance. And you become whole before you share yourself, so that when you do share yourself, you are sharing something real. The Stoic tradition consistently pointed toward self-mastery as the foundation of the good life, not dependence on others, not the accumulation of approval, not the management of other people's perception of you. And the lived truth is that a person who has learned to stand without leaning cannot be easily knocked over. They will not accept connections that require them to be less than they are. They will not remain in situations that shrink rather than expand them. So if you are single right now, resist the cultural pressure to treat it as a problem that requires urgent solution. Resist the internal pressure to fill the space before you have used it for what it is actually for. See it instead for what it genuinely is, a rare and finite opportunity to become the most grounded, most authentic, most capable version of yourself. Because the person who can stand in complete solitude without being frightened by what they find there is precisely the person who can stand anywhere, with anyone, and remain fully themselves. That is not a small thing, that is everything. Sit with this tonight. Ask yourself with complete honesty whether you are running from your own company or whether you are learning to grow inside it. That single question, taken seriously and answered truthfully, has the power to redirect the entire remaining arc of your life.